Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Emily Sweeney is here, and a lot of us know that Emily Sweeney is a top reporter for the Boston Globe and Pulitzer Prize winner. And Emily wrote 2 books, Boston Organized Crime and Gangland Boston. Through this series, we're going to break both these books down, and we're going to go from the history of the Sicilian Mafia, which they started arriving to the late 1800s. And actually, there's an article that she has from 1895 talking about the Boston Mafia. And the Boston Mafia was very influential through the whole country. And, there's not a lot done on Boston. So I'm hoping breaking down this series, breaking these books down, we're going to talk about the bosses, especially Espary Messina, one of the first bosses in Boston. He was Sicilian, born Sicilian, moved to Boston with his family. By 1925, he was established in the North Ends of Little Italy and became a capo in the Sicilian Mafia. And we know the story from there on up. And we'll talk about Raymond Petriarca, the Petriarca family. We're going to talk about Prohibition. We're going to talk about the Irish gangs. We're going to talk about everything that happened in Boston. So I want you to stay tuned. This is episode 1, a little summary of what we're going to do. And then by the next episode, we're really going to start breaking this down. Maybe person by person. So stay tuned, and I'll be right back with Emily. Thank you. All right, I'm back here with Emily Sweeney. Emily, all my viewers, they want to know about the history of the Boston Mob, all the way back to the 1800s, if we go that far. Now, I've read your books. They're awesome. You got a lot of history in there. Being a top reporter at the Boston Globe, that's, we know we got good information. So I'd like to get started and, maybe open these books up to everybody.
Yeah, totally. First of all, thanks so much for having me on the show, Bobby. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for coming on.
And I've done a ton of research into the history of organized crime in Boston and the greater Boston area, in New England. It's a tough topic to research because, a lot of guys didn't keep, exactly notes and records, you know what I mean? A lot of people, this information that, didn't want to be found out, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
So right here, this is my first book, Boston Organized Crime, which kind of took a look at organized crime going back to Prohibition days in Boston. I have another book, Gangland Boston, that goes even further back to the 19th century. And the earliest, mentions of the mafia that I could find in Boston were in the 1890s. So this is an article from the Boston Post in 1895.
Wow. Like that.
And back then, the first sentence in it says, the mafia exists in Boston. And at the time, they thought there were about 200 made guys.
At that time?
Yeah,
in
1895.
Boston. Wow.
So, the history goes, really way back.
Well, see, this is the same thing when they landed in New Orleans and the East Coast, and the Black Hand came over with the Italians. I never realized there was that many made guys up in Boston at that time.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is, you have to take everything with a grain of salt, but this was the news reports at the time.
Wow.
They relied on law enforcement sources, and 200 made guys. You have to remember there was a huge wave of Italian immigration.
Oh, at that time.
Yeah, and so all the guys from Sicily and people who were used to or who grew up with mafia organizations, they brought that over here as part of the culture and everything. Kind of a way of self-policing and
Oh, we know because the Italians had to be protected when they first got here.
Yeah,
they really needed the Black Hand when they came here.
So it's the this is the early mafia in Boston. One of the earliest mob bosses in Boston that I've been able to find, like in my research, is Espary Messina. Okay, he came over. He was from Sicily, and he, let's see, like by 1925, he had a nice booming business on Prince Street.
Okay, yeah, no, not that.
28 and a half Prince Street, to be exact. It was a wholesale grocery business, but he was a very well-respected figure in the community and also in the underworld as well.
Right.
He actually rose like to the rank of being one of the top guys in the country at one point.
Yeah, I heard that. It started, a lot of power came out of Boston in the beginning.
You know, so,
Yeah.
I mean, it was temporary, but, I
Yeah.
mean, nonetheless, he was probably the earliest mob boss in Boston. And the guy that took over from him, you know, this is Phil Bracola.
Yeah, I know also.
Yeah, yes, I mean, now his name is like a lot more familiar. He ran boxing promotions, and he was in power for a long time. But yeah, and then you had guys, and again, actually, I should also mention too, Prohibition was like such a huge thing. I mean, it's such a it made organized crime boom.
Yeah,
You know,
it catapulted it.
oh,
It did.
totally. I mean, from
Yeah.
the 1890s, you had like, you know, mafia was like, you know, maybe extorting money from, you know, new immigrants, also, you know, doing protection. But this like changed everything. As soon as they made liquor illegal, suddenly, I mean, floodgates of money, you know,
Oh, yeah.
could be had. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
and guess who was ready to step up?
Yeah. The ball.
The Italians
Yeah.
and also the Irish.
Oh, the Irish too. Yeah. Yeah, and even the Jewish gangs were involved in all
Yes,
of that too.
yeah, of course, totally. Bootlegging was huge, and there was
Yeah.
a lot of money to be made.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is Joe Lombardo,
Yes, I know Bojo.
another, you know, big JL. He was another like big guy, and he was reputed, you know, to be involved in bootlegging. One of his partners was Frank Cucciaria, who was another very like a leading like mob boss. He actually attended the Appalachian Conference
Oh, he was there?
later on. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. This is
Yeah.
an old picture of him
Yeah.
back in close to the Prohibition days.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the Italian mob was based out of the North End during
Right.
Prohibition.
Right.
You know, no surprise there.
Mm-hmm.
And some of their biggest, like I guess, like, you know, cross-city competition would be the Irish.
Yes. Yeah.
And that would be the Guston gang in
Mhm.
South Boston.
Yeah.
Right here, this is Stephen Wallace. He was the one of the leaders of the Guston gang. He was known as Steve Guston.
Mm-hmm.
He was a boxer, and it's kind of interesting because he actually made it to the Olympic team.
Did he really?
Yeah. He went over to Antwerp to
Mhm.
box, and he went over there, and the ship that they were supposed to go on, something happened to it.
Yeah.
So they ended up going on this other ship, which turned out to be kind of like a hellish way of getting over there. So meanwhile, you got all these Olympians crammed on a boat, trying to like train and like just make it over to Belgium. And he got over there, and he ended up not boxing at all. He ended up being like put down as a sub.
Oh, okay.
So he comes back, still in, he was on the Olympic team.
Mhm.
But I don't know. Part of me wonders like if that made him have more of a chip on his shoulder when he
Probably
got back.
did. It probably did. He went all the way over there and he didn't get the fight.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I'm
You know
sure
what I
that
mean?
pissed him off a little. Yeah.
So when he got back, now we're talking like this is the early 20s. Him and his brother Frankie, also a boxer, really they ran the Guston gang.
Mhm.
And there's Frankie. And yeah, apparently they took enough control over, bootlegging and just like moving liquor and like, things that, they caught the eye of the mafia.
Mhm.
And in 1931, there was like a huge turning point in like the history of organized crime in Boston.
Right.
It was in December 1931. And that's when a couple of the Gustin gang guys, the Irish guys, go over the North End to have a sit down with the Italians, right? Like, so it happened actually right here in this building, which is like, it looks pretty much the same other than the Citizens Bank sign.
Yeah, that's across from the cafe, Victoria. Yeah.
So yeah, so the Gustin gang, they show up. Frankie's there with kind of like his enforcer, Dodo Walsh. They go up, they walk upstairs, and, you know, they think they're having a sit down, but, you know, I don't know if something goes sideways or maybe, you know, they were ambushed completely.
I know the story. Yeah. Yeah, they were.
And not to laugh, but like, you know, that suddenly, and that's when like the Italians really took power.
Yeah.
Like it really asserted themselves because, you know, I don't know if the Gustin gang was trying to do a power grab or thought they even had the.
Well, this I do know from history and growing up in the North End.
Yeah, yeah.
And being around wise guys all my life. They were really fair, these Irish guys. They were tough guys. You know how tough the Irish were over here.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and these guys, the Gustin, they were pretty serious guys. And really, they thought retaliation was going to come after this. But what happened, there was no retaliation.
Yeah.
When that happened, that's when they pushed forward. And the Italians really started taking over everything at that point.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And, yeah, it was a very interesting time in history. And, you know, it kind of led to, like, the downfall of the Gustin gang.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, the mob, you know, really began to, like, control things, even beyond the North End.
Yeah. They pushed out all over. Yeah.
So, but, yeah, I would say that was, like, probably the biggest turning point in mob history.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Trying to think.
Well, my interest, I'll tell you really,
Yeah.
you know, to talk about this, because you really researched everything. You know, my grandfather, Paul Luisi, was born, I think, in 1902
Okay.
in Boston. My great-grandfathers all came from Italy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Grandpa Paul Luisi was born here.
Okay.
And I know how powerful the mob started getting at that time because the Italians couldn't do anything without the mob.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that they couldn't get jobs. The mob actually forced and pushed out, you know, and got the Italians some clout in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Really, the North End, it was English, you know, was Protestant, right? Then it was Jewish, and then the Italians pushed the Jews out. And it became an Italian neighborhood.
And it stayed an Italian neighborhood.
And it stayed an Italian neighborhood because it ended up, the North End is the power base
Mm-hmm.
for the mob.
No, totally.
Now, when Joe Lombardi, that we talked about, retired, that's when Patriarca came in,
Yes. Yeah.
you know.
I mean, Patriarcha, I mean, obviously he was coming out of Providence.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And, yeah, I mean, that's a whole other,
Yeah, we're going to get into that into another show.
yeah.
But I want the people to realize the power that even Joe Lombardi at the end, because he was the acting boss at the end before, when Phil went back to Sicily.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes,
You know.
totally.
And the early years of the Mafia here, it's just an amazing story.
Mm-hmm.
But the Irish remained tough guys, had all their gangs,
Yep.
were controlling a lot in the city still.
Yeah.
And they
totally.
were.
But they stayed out of the North End.
They stayed out of the North End, and there were great relationships worked out with the Irish.
Mm-hmm.
Except for the wars. We're going to talk about the Irish wars later,
Oh, yes.
when the Italians got involved. But that's going to be for another story.
Yeah, I know it's interesting too. Like, you know, a lot of people don't realize that how dangerous the North End was at one time.
Oh, it was
you
bad.
know, Hanover Street was called the shooting gallery.
Yep.
You know, there were like drive-by shootings.
Yep.
It was a wild time.
Mhm.
You know.
Yep.
So
It really was. Well, we kind of reenacted that a little in the 90s.
true.
Hmm. We'll talk about that later, too.
But yeah, some of the early mob bosses, I mean, it's really fascinating. And I mean, how some of them like stayed on too. You know, Cucciaria going to Appalachian meeting in 1957.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, obviously this is decades after Prohibition, but
Mhm.
he went, you know, allegedly as a representative, you know, for this area.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
it's pretty wild.
They were saying that Sonny Boy Rizzo was at that too, at Appalachia. No, I never got that verified.
Yeah,
It's just a story that I heard.
I haven't heard that. Like, I only heard about Cucharia, but I can definitely look into it more. You know what I mean? You never know.
See, sometimes you hear
So-
things in the street.
So,
Yeah, Sonny Boy was probably just a driver then, so it wouldn't have been that
I
important.
mean, but he could have been. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he
I'm
could have
not.
been
I'm
there
not
at the
sure though. Like, because I mean, would Frank have gone alone? No. I don't know.
No, of course
Definitely
not.
not. Like,
No, not at all.
Who was with him? I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
Well, he was a man of power at the time, and I'm sure that Sonny was a driver or one of these guys,
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question.
Yeah,
And if
they-
anybody watching has any
Yeah.
suggestions or heard anything,
Believe me, they're gonna come back with a lot of knowledge, and they're gonna come back with a lot of questions. That's why I love doing this, and I want them to see this and talk about this.
Yeah, no,
You know.
it's fascinating, and
Mhm.
I have a Facebook page. It's all facebook.com Boston Organized Crime,
Mhm.
and I post a lot of photos, stuff that didn't make it into the book. Photos that I get from various sources. And it's been amazing how many relatives of some of these old mobsters have come forward and have sent me pictures from the family photo albums
That's
and stuff.
amazing. Yeah, that is.
And so many of them have and all the feedback has been really great because sometimes it might be tough seeing
Mhm.
your great grandfather possibly on a wanted poster, but you know what I mean.
Mhm.
I've heard from a whole bunch of them, and they sent me a lot of interesting, anecdotes and stuff from the family side of things. And
That's really nice.
a lot of the guys, the stories that I've heard, is just people were in the life, to make ends meet and to
Mhm.
feed their kids.
Yeah. Well, that's what it was all about.
So,
That's what it was all about. The Black Hand was created to protect. That started back in Sicily. Because you remember the Turks invaded, the French invaded, and this is why this was put together.
yeah,
And they called it the Black Hand. Now I've heard 100 stories why they called it the Black Hand. Because they worked in the coal mines, robbing the kid. There was all kinds of stories. I'm not going to get into them. I don't know if they're true or not.
yeah.
A lot of things are myth, But that was the Black Hand in the beginning. And then I went to the Mafia. And now today, in the United States, we call it La Cosa Nostra.
Right.
know.
No, totally.
It's embarrassing to me because I was a capo di in Boston, Philly, and I don't know the history. I never really paid attention to it. I know about Joe Lombardo up,
Yep.
but really going back there, this is why reading your book is so interesting to me.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Being in the life and not having this information, so you're educating me with this interview. So this is what's great about the series that we're about to do.
Yeah.
So I it's good we started there. I want to go back again to 1895.
Okay.
We know what happened in New Orleans with the Italians
Yeah.
and how they were persecuted over there
Yep.
and how they used to call us the N-word and that Jim Crow and all this other nonsense that was down there.
Yeah.
They were hanging Italians. Would they hang 11 of them? That time, it was 11. Yeah, it was 11. A lot of people think that the Black Hand started there in the Mafia. But really, these people came in all the ports
Yeah, totally.
at the same
and
time.
this is,
The
they're
Italians
family
flooded
tradition-
in.
Family
Yeah.
traditions from Sicily.
Yeah.
And like I said, that article that I pulled up from 1895, that's the earliest that I could find about
Yeah.
the Mafia being in Boston. But who's to say,
But that's around the right era in
Mhm.
New Orleans, too, 1890.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
why I wanted to go back there and talk about that because, I think that's just amazing.
No, totally.
How it come over with the culture.
It's let's see. Yeah, like the Mafia in Boston, where the head of the order resides, number of the Mafia in the city, always extends aid to a member in distress. They have
Mhm.
secret methods of communication.
hmm Well, what I'm going to do, too, is I'll blow this up for the people to
Yeah.
read it because this is great.
No, it's really interesting.
Mhm.
Let's see. Secret methods of communication. And let's see. News could be spread. It could mobilize its members in less time than the state militia could be gotten together in the same
Oh,
space
this is
of
true.
territory.
Yeah. Believe me, because it went from here to New York, Rhode Island, disconnected all the way to Rhode Island, even in those days.
Yeah. Every loyal mafia realizes and cheerfully accepts the fact that he may be called upon to sacrifice his life for the organization. I don't know if maybe that's cheerfully, but
Well,
realistically.
what they said, that was true, because Omerta, in those days, that was it.
Yeah.
Nobody talked.
Oh, I'm sure.
No one talked. And listen, they send you on a mission. Even today, you're supposed to go without question.
Yeah.
And you don't know if you're coming back and arrested doing life. You don't know what's going to happen.
Right. No, totally.
That generation that came over, they were true mafia. Not like today. Today, we're watered down. There's still a mafia, but not like this.
Not 200 people.
These guys would walk in the middle of Hanover Street if you told them to shoot somebody in those days.
Yeah.
And because it was our neighborhood, they could walk away and no one would tell them. Because Omerta wasn't just for the wise guys, it was for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
That was the code that you don't talk.
Yeah.
Today, you kill someone in the middle of the street, 20 people are taking pictures of you on the camera.
Right.
The days are over.
Right. No, totally. I mean, look at even like, you could, some comparison to like Charlestown, very tight-knit neighborhood.
Really tight.
Which, back in the day it was like hard to like.
That was code of silence over there.
Yeah. Hard to like, prosecute anything over there because everybody looked the other way, or they were afraid to speak,
Right.
So. But,
Well, that was a really, I love Charlestown. A lot of my friends were in there.
No,
Most of my friends were Irish. And my wife, first wife was Irish, Donovan.
Yeah.
My kids are half Irish. So, I mean, in Boston it was different because, I was born in the North End, and then my mother moved to East Boston. And, East Boston in the 60s, 70s, and 80s really mixed with Italian and Irish.
Yeah.
That was the main population there.
Totally.
And that's, we grew up with all these kids. Charlestown in the North End, in my mother's era, we're always fighting.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. I mean, and
Yeah.
if you just look at like the geography of like how Boston's laid out, you know what I mean? Like Charlestown's like so separate.
It
You
is.
know what I mean?
Yeah, it's over the bridge.
Southy in a way, it's kind of like separate.
Yeah.
And you can see how like these pockets of ethnic like groups like stayed
Yeah.
there, and you know what I mean? Like it's yeah.
And the North End was really unique, too.
Oh, definitely.
Where
Without
it's
a doubt.
positioned.
It still
right now.
is.
It still is.
Yeah,
it still is. And there's still a lot of Italian families in there.
Yeah.
You know? But we now it's infiltrated with business and college kids now.
Right.
They're in there now.
But,
We all do the same thing, the Irish and Italian, and we grow up in a neighborhood. We want to move out to, I'd say, Medford,
right.
Revere,
Yeah.
Andover.
If you're from the
Woburn.
North End, you go north.
Yeah.
If you're Irish, you go the Irish Riviera. It's like Scituate.
Yeah,
Like-
exactly. And they're still doing that today.
No, totally. Seriously.
It's sad because it's not the neighbor, not Locals and Austria, not the Mafia, but the neighborhoods are never going to be the same again. That's what's disturbing. After being gone for 20 years, of coming home,
Yeah.
and my culture wasn't there anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, the coffee shops are there, the restaurants.
Right.
But you go in the North End,
Kids running rampant to the streets and stuff.
It's
like
over.
That. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I grew up like in the city in Dorchester, and like, you know what I mean? Like, I grew up at a time when there were like, it seemed like no adults were around. Everybody was working.
Yeah.
So the kids like kind of just ruled the streets.
Yeah. No, I know.
For better, for worse.
Oh, yeah.
And it was I don't know. I look back, I'm like, wow, it's a great time to grow up. But compared to kids today, you know what I mean? Like,
I'll
they're a
tell
lot
you.
safer.
Well, let me tell you how the North End was when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Because I got just a few years on you. East Boston, the same way. I mean, on Maverick Street in East Boston, at the point, the mothers used to sit out till 2, 3 in the morning in the summer.
Yeah.
On chairs, on the sidewalks.
Yeah. Smoking Newports.
Smoking their Newports. They're cool. My mother smoked cools.
Yeah.
They're out there every night. They go out. They wash their stoops and their sidewalks.
Yeah.
Everything. The whole street was clean. We're running around 2, 3 in the morning, young kids.
Yep.
Nobody will bother us. No one would come near us.
Mm-hmm.
The North End, they said at one time, I figure out what magazine it was in, was the safest neighborhood in the country.
Yeah.
That's when the mob ruled there.
Yeah, I mean, I can
Oh.
see that, you know, and also too, like the the West End of Boston, where my family's originally from,
Yeah.
also had like quite a big organized crime element, not of like gang leaders, you know, per se, but
A lot of wise guys came out of
but
the
yeah,
West
totally. It was a very like diverse, mixed
End.
neighborhood.
There was Irish and
Um,
Italian.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Jews and
And Polacks.
yep, and
Yeah.
it was it was definitely a interesting place.
You know what's funny? I mean, New York's New York. Nothing compares to that in the boroughs, and I understand
Yeah.
that. But nobody really realized what came out of Boston and how powerful in these early days Boston was in Cosa Nostra. Well, I'm going to say Mafia, not Cosa Nostra.
Yeah.
How it was when these people came over and what they accomplished and what they did.
Mhm.
You know, because, you know, my grandparents come over. It was hard to get jobs.
Mhm.
My grandfather, Paul, worked in the shipyard. I'll tell you another story. Grandfather that worked on the railroad. All right. He was tall, light-skinned, everything. Big guy. But he wouldn't talk because they'd hear the accent.
Oh.
So they'd pick him out of the line because they thought he was Irish. Irish,
Gotcha.
you know. But then when he started talking, he got a hard time. Because the Irish settled here first. They really did.
Yeah.
You know, and they had control of everything.
Definitely, like a lot of them on the police force. That's
The
for
police,
sure.
they had control over everything.
At
Control,
that time.
yeah, they did at that time. They did.
Um,
And they were a force here, you know, and they're still powerful people there, obviously.
yeah, definitely in Boston.
But now the Irish and Italian go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
No, without a doubt.
we're all mixed now. It's great.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, just at the turn of the century was like definitely a different story.
Oh, forgot it. It won't be happening. You know.
But
But this is a lot of great information.
yeah, no, definitely, and I look forward to like bringing some more.
Yeah, well, I figure every week, you know, we'll do the series, and every week we're going to come out with a show. And we're going to start, like you said, we started in 1895,
Mhm.
and we're going to start working our way up. And we're going to break down La Cosa Nostra, from Luciano down all the way into Boston, in the power base in Boston. With Petriarca.
Yep.
We're going to go right up to today.
Yeah.
You know, so this is going to be a good series, and you got to tell them where they can get your books, because now that they're going to start watching this series, I'm sure they're going to want to.
Yeah, Boston Organized Crime and Gangland Boston. You can order them, I mean, through Amazon, and they're also most major bookstores, and also through directly from the publisher.
Mhm.
If you're into organized crime, my Facebook page, I got like over 6,000 like members, and if you read the comments on some of the photos of like people who knew people, like it's really interesting.
Oh yeah, they get right into. Yeah, it's great. It's great.
And that's facebook.com/Boston Organized Crime, and links to buy the books are on there too. That's probably
Okay,
the
so what I'll do
easiest way.
after, I'm going to post a link underneath.
Okay.
Okay, and they can start going to your site and start looking at the
Yeah,
books
yeah.
and see what they want to do.
Yeah, totally.
You know-
And check out just all the photos and stuff because, like I said, I've had like relatives and I mean, people send me photos, really interesting stuff. So
Yeah.
I love to share it and like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Also, the other good news that we have is everything's set with the book now.
Yeah. Moving
Everything's
forward,
set. So she's
Looking
going to be hitting the
forward
typewriter, what, next week?
Yes.
Next week, maybe?
Totally.
All right, tell them what the book's going to be about.
So yeah, I mean, this is gonna be, you know, the title I've tentatively is "Four on the Floor: The Bobby Louisi Story,"
Oh.
and it's gonna be about everything behind the scenes that happened, at the shootout at the '99, to your life, Bobby, and also going into like what the the mob scene was like in the 90s when it was in a lot of rival factions and so we're looking
Yeah, we're
forward
going to be talking about everything. Also, Capital Christian hopefully will be ready to sell by August 1st.
excellent.
It should be all set. It's already out there now. They already made the cover. Actually, I'm going to post it up later, do a little commercial.
Nice.
I'm pre-selling the book right now. We'll be talking about that eventually too,
Excellent.
in our book.
Looking forward to it.
You know, so it covers some of the things that you're going to talk about in your book, but not to the extent.
Yeah.
So even if they read Capital Christian, it's not going to interfere with what we're doing.
No, not at all.
No.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to go like a lot deeper and kind of set the scene too
Yeah.
of the mob scene, like different factions and everything.
Yeah, you
So-
got to see when I wrote it in prison from Capital Christian, it was more of a testimony. I think you've seen that.
Yeah.
You know, so really, you're going to go in depth. I really didn't. I skirted over a lot of things.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to get in trouble again.
Right.
Or get anyone else in trouble. Don't worry about that. But I think the both books are going to be great. So we'll be back next week with another episode. And I'll tell you, this might end up being a dozen shows
Yeah, we'll see.
by the time we
Totally.
get to present time. So follow the series. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Hello everybody, let's go up to the Etsy store and we can get God's Plan Revealed and my new book that's coming out in August from Capital Christian. Pre-order now.